Do 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 do. Hey, how's it going? It's Nancy Gamon. Thanks for visiting. So what's the difference between tie-dyeing and ice dyeing anyway? And is it possible to ice dye with a tie-dye kit? Well, today we'll take a look at both those questions as we compare side by side traditional tie-dyeing with liquid dye and tie-dyeing using ice cubes and powdered dye. The nice people at Hiipoo sent me one of their tie-dye kits to experiment with, so let's open it up and see what's inside. I think the last time I did tie-dyeing I was a kid in summer camp, so this will be fun. All right, looks like we have some rubber bands, a variety of colors of powdered dye, a tablecloth to protect the work surface, disposable gloves. Oh, some plastic Ziploc bags. A color chart, that's handy. Some instructions, more colors, and a whole set of little squeeze bottles with instructions: fill to line with the water, shake until dissolved, for either the whole bag or the half bag. I like that clarity. And let's see, we've also got some little spritzers, I guess, if we want to spray the dye. Wow, that's a lot of bottles. Very cool. Okay, so let's take a look at the directions and see what we've got going on here. It says we'll also need a plastic container, a rack, and some paper towels. And I think I'll also get a dust mask. All right, so the instructions say for a darker or brighter color, double the amount of dye. So I'm gonna do that because who doesn't love brighter colors? So I have my dye bottles. I'll just unscrew the top here, and I'm just gonna fill the water to this halfway mark, but then use the full bag of dye so that I get a brighter, stronger color. There we go. Now I'm gonna put on my dust mask. I'm gonna start with red. And put the little top back on. And then I'm also going to do royal blue. Oh, I should have had my gloves on. Dark green and pink. Now shake slowly and continuously to ensure an even color. These look pretty good. I'm going to try this pattern here, the bullseye. It says pull the fabric up from the center and gather it, bind it with some rubber bands, and apply the liquid dye. I'm working with 2 pieces of identical 100% cotton. The fabric is damp, but it has not been soaked in soda ash, so I'm going to create just this gathered tube. I guess that's right. And I'll bind it in the center. It doesn't really say how many times to bind it, so I think I'll just go until I can't go anymore, which seems to be about there. And then I'll do the same thing halfway along here, and then halfway down this way. And I'll do the same thing with this second piece of fabric, just gathering from the center. I'm going to set the project onto a rack over a tub and apply the liquid dye. I'm going to start with pink at the center, and I'm going to kind of roll the fabric so that I get the dye on all sides and some good saturation. Then I'll do royal blue, then red, and lastly dark green. Then it says to seal the fabric up in a bag and let it rest 24 hours for the dye to absorb into the fabric. So there is the conventional tie-dye with the liquid dye. Now let's try the same thing with some ice cubes and powdered dye. I like to cover the fabric with a protective rag. Sometimes not all of the powder turns to liquid in the ice dyeing process, and a little rag just helps protect the fabric against spotting. So I'm layering on the ice cubes, and then I'm going to sprinkle on the powdered dye from the tie-dye kit, starting with rose red in the center, and then doing sky blue and grass green and dark red. The ice dye project also needs to rest for 24 hours. I have quite a bit of leftover liquid dye from my first project, so just for giggles I'm going to try this pattern as well on a kind of a discolored t-shirt. So this is the scrunch. Grab the fabric with your fingers, bunch together. It looks like they've rubber banded it a couple of places, and then apply the dye. We'll start with the pink up in this corner, the red, the dark green up here, and the royal blue, and then I'll flip it to try and get it from the other side as well. And I think there's not very much dark green, so I may go ahead and treat it to a little bit of what's left of the royal blue over here. And I'll seal this one up as well. And now we just have 24 hours to wait until we get to see our surprises. Sweet dreams! We have our 2 liquid dye projects and our ice dye project. So let's take a look at the liquid dyed fabric first. Well, this looks pretty good, I think. We've got a clear bullseye shape in the center and some kind of interesting feather shapes where the blue meets the red. I'm curious to see what this looks like once it's rinsed out. Here's the t-shirt. This was done very casually, so I'm curious to see how this turned out. Looks like we've got some nice bright colors, red, blues, pinks, and greens. Some neat shapes and patterns on the back. Let's take a look at the ice dyed fabric. You can see kind of clumps of undissolved dye here on this rag. That's what I was talking about, why I like to cover a project with a protective cloth. It looks like we've got very vibrant colors here. I'm not quite sure which way is up on this piece. We might have to see what it looks like once it's rinsed out. But again, we've got a good clear color here in the center. Some interesting shapes where the pink meets the green. The color looks pretty solid in most places right now, but I imagine as the dye is rinsed out, we'll be able to see more subtleties. So the next step is to wash the fabric in cold water with a mild detergent, rinse and dry. So here's the fabric that was created using the liquid dye, and I think these results actually look pretty good. The fabric survived the finishing process with really bold and striking colors intact. There was very little bleeding, so the areas that were white stayed pretty much white, and the colors seem pretty true to what was advertised on the labels. And here's the t-shirt, also dyed with the liquid dye. Again, good strong colors. The t-shirt did seem to have a little bit of bleeding in areas. That may be due to just the thickness of the t-shirt and maybe me not rinsing out the red completely. Some of the white areas seem to have turned a little pinkish. And here's the fabric that was ice dyed with the powdered dye. This has a very different look to it from the pattern that was created with the liquid dye. I probably should have put on more of the green powder. It looks like that got pretty diluted, but the other colors are fairly strong and have some variation in them. There is quite a bit of bleeding and staining on this piece. I kind of left it crumpled up damp. As far as home dyes go, I found the Hiipoo product to deliver better results than what I've experienced with the RIT dyes. So if you're looking to experiment with tie-dye for the first time or throw a fun children's party, I think this kit is a perfectly reasonable option. I would stick with its intended purpose of using the dye in liquid form and mixing the colors double strength. If you're more serious about your dye practice, or you want to explore the beautiful nuances of ice dyeing, I'd suggest sticking with Procyon dyes for those techniques. If you'd like to experiment together, head on over to nancygamon.com, where you can check out the current selection of workshops. I'll see you there. Do